wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome to GB News. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's broadcaster Danny Kelly and also commentator and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Amankona. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon, I am Polly Middlehurst and this is your GB News at 4 o'clock. The Prime Minister has been accused of leading a culture of disregard for COVID rules. It comes after a new picture emerged of Boris Johnson taking part in an online Downing Street quiz flanked by his colleagues during last year's lockdown. There was no evidence of social distancing and masks weren't being worn. At the time, London, which was in Tier 2, meant there should have been no mixing of households indoors apart from support bubbles. Labour's Deputy Leader Angela Rayner says he's unfit to lead the country. Some people in Nottinghamshire agree.
I really do think that he is making a lot of mistakes. I don't think he should be in government. I'm not sure that I think the Conservative Party should be in government, to be honest. They've all broken so many rules.
Well, I think it's wrong what they did, and,
If he doesn't do anything, he's going to get blamed, and if he does something, he's going to get blamed anyway, innit?
I don't see anybody else to lead the country, really, at the moment. There's no other leaders out there.
Well, the new COVID restrictions are expected to become law next week in England, with the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer confirming his party will support the government in Tuesday's vote. The booster programme is also being extended to curb the rise in Omicron cases. Millions of people aged between 30 and 39 years old will be offered third jabs in England from tomorrow. The UK Health Security Agency has warned further measures may be needed to tackle the new variant, which is now spreading fast. The country is said to be facing an inevitable wave of COVID infections, with Omicron cases already being treated in hospitals.
We stopped being devoted to COVID after the vaccination levels rose sufficiently to reduce hospital numbers. And we've been trying to clear the backlog, but the fact is, we haven't made much of an inroad into it, and it's going to grow clearly if people end up in hospital again with things that are related to Omicron. And that's very likely, even though Omicron appears to be milder.
Well, Scotland's hospitality sector is stepping up its call for financial support after the government reintroduced COVID restrictions. Businesses say they're seeing mass cancellations and are going to need help to survive over the Christmas period. The government's now considering tighter measures after new self-isolation rules came into force. Paul Waterson, a spokesperson for the Scottish Licensed Trade Association, says he's shocked and he's worried about what businesses will do.
Came as a bolt of the blue for us. We had geared up, many people had got food in and so on, and was geared up for a really busy weekend. This is the worst scenario we could have. We're open, but people are being told not to come in. It takes us back to the very beginning of all this, when you might remember that the Prime Minister said that pubs would stay open, but people shouldn't go in them.
Meanwhile, away from COVID, a gun has been recovered from the scene in West London, where a man was shot and killed by police. Officers were responding to reports of a person carrying a firearm entering a bank and a bookmaker's in Kensington yesterday. Witnesses say they heard 3 shots being fired. The man was treated by emergency crews but died at the scene. The WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has reportedly suffered a stroke in prison. His fiancée, Stella Morris, says it happened during the High Court battle over his extradition to the US. She says the stroke was triggered by stress over his future. He's currently being held at HMP Belmarsh, which is a high-security prison in London. His lawyers are expecting to take his case to the Supreme Court. The Foreign Secretary has promised a further £75 million in aid to Afghanistan. It follows discussions at their G7 meeting in Liverpool about what action could be taken to address the worsening humanitarian situation there and how to engage with the leadership, the Taliban. It brings the UK's financial commitment to Afghanistan to £286 million this year alone. Officials say no funding will go directly to the Taliban. Charities will be used instead. And Lewis Hamilton has missed out on a record-breaking 8th Formula One World Championship after a dramatic end to the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Hamilton led from the start, but then his rival Max Verstappen was able to overtake him in the final lap to secure the win for himself and his first ever title. Hamilton's team Mercedes has lodged 2 protests with Formula One's governing body over the race result. That's your news update. I'm back in half an hour with the latest news headlines. Now let's return to Nana Akua.
I'm afraid I still don't get it. What is the big deal in carrying a COVID pass? I mean, call me naive, although I probably wouldn't if I were you. So the new rules under Plan B, which come into play on Wednesday, will require a COVID pass for venues with a capacity of 500 or more. So either a negative test or proof of 2 vaccine doses. They'll be required before you can get into these venues. Now, presumably, that would be a lateral flow test, which you can get free, or proof of vaccine. The vaccine is also free. So what is the big deal? They have them in France, where you would think that they would be the first place to object. But on the whole, these have actually been accepted. It's simply no biggie. Now, in the meantime, until we find out more about the severity of Omicron, I would say that a COVID pass could be a good precautionary measure leading up to Christmas and the New Year's typical celebratory period. Although if it transpires that the new variant is milder and does not cause the cytokine storm associated with all the other COVID variants, Omicron could prove to be a natural vaccine. Ellen O'Reilly, Professor of Immunology and Disease at the University of Edinburgh, has suggested that, and because we don't know enough. So it's a big one, isn't it? It is considerably milder, and if it is, yes, then it could act as a vaccine. She said, Omicron is spreading so quickly that unless you're living as a hermit, you're very likely to come across it in the next couple of weeks. So currently here in the UK, there are approximately 20 to 30,000 Omicron cases. That's mostly in London and mostly affecting 20 to 25-year-olds. And as it is pretty rare for this age group to suffer complications of COVID, coupled with the fact that we don't yet know how severe this new variant is, it would seem prudent, actually, to me, to take precautionary measures, which also include mask wearing. But Boris Johnson is now facing a large-scale Commons rebellion from dozens of Tory MPs who oppose the introduction of the vaccine or COVID pass. Former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland said, I think there's a problem with us merrily going down the road of compulsion and a uniform approach where there isn't the clearest evidence base. Here's the thing. If this new variant, Omicron, which has a doubling infection rate of 2 to 3 days, turns out to be more deadly, although current data does not confirm the latter, then we're in real hot water. Surely it's wiser to plan for the worst and hope for the best. We failed to do this at the start of the pandemic. People openly criticised the government for not locking down soon or fast enough. I was among numerous people who felt that they weren't taking COVID seriously. This was our failing at the start of the pandemic. So why is there so much opposition now? I take a lateral flow test every day, and I would do so out of courtesy if I were visiting a friend or a relative indoors or going to an indoor venue. No one needs to tell me to do a test. And if someone visits my home and hasn't done one, they wouldn't have a problem with being asked to do so. And if they did, then their foot would not cross the threshold of my home. I wouldn't let them in. So what's the big deal in having a COVID passport? So before we get stuck into the debate, here is what else is coming up today. Now, each Sunday at 5 o'clock, I'm joined by a celebrity or former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting career and take a look at life after the job. We talk highs, lows, lessons learnt and all that kind of stuff. And today, you remember the Stig? Well, listen, after the dramatic finale to the Formula 1 season, I thought it'd be great to do one outside motorsport. So how about this? Racing driver and former Top Gear Stig, Ben Collins. Yes. See, I always wondered what he looked like. I've always wondered. There he is. I'll be joined in the studio by friend of the show as well later on, foreign affairs expert James Marley, to find out what's making the headlines across the globe. And today we've got warnings from the G7 leaders that there'll be serious consequences if Russia invades Ukraine. Today also marks 2 years since this man won a landslide election. But 2 years on, Boris Johnson, what do you think? Has he been a success or failure? We'll be looking at the highs and, of course, the lows. Email me your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or why not tweet me at gbnews. Right, let's get started. Welcome to my panel, broadcaster Danny Kelly and commentator and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Albi Ammon-Conan. Well done, welcome.
Welcome, thank you.
Good afternoon.
It's great to be back in the furnace. That is a non-air-conditioned studio here in Paddington. It's brilliant.
Well, I love the heat. I'm sorry, I'm not complaining. It's either if you said to me, would you rather burn or freeze? I'm afraid I'd choose to burn.
Oh, would you?
Would you?
Yeah.
No.
Why would
I
you
think
want
I'd
to freeze?
choose to freeze.
Really?
Yeah.
Because burning is probably quite painful.
Well, it's quick though, isn't it? Freezing is very cold and slow.
I would rather neither.
To be honest, I'd rather stay alive.
Yeah.
Maybe a touch of air conditioning. Maybe that's the...
OK, right. Right, so what do you think then? Boris Johnson, I mean, he's got these MPs who are rebelling against what, to me, seems relatively sensible measures. I'm going to start with you, Albi.
So I wonder why you think vaccine passports were a relatively sensible measure, because actually all of the data that we've seen in Scotland, there's a whole 70-page report which has gone into vaccine passports, and it actually shows that they're relatively ineffective at stopping transmission. So I guess my question is, what is the point in spending all of this political capital on a measure which doesn't actually achieve anything when it comes to stopping the transmission of COVID?
Well, that's a good question, but the reason I think I'd refer to you, for example, if you go to countries in other parts of the world, they quite effectively ensure that certain diseases are obliterated from their countries by using a vaccine passport scheme. So the reason I don't object to it is because I've already accepted it. So I don't really see it's a big deal in accepting it, whether it works or not. And I suspect that if you look at whether these things work, I suspect it's more to do with how you're assessing that data. I suspect that they do actually work if they're done properly, but are they going to be done properly? That would be my real question. But what do you think?
I agree. I don't see the problem with it. I think logistically it's going to be difficult. There was a Scottish game, a Scotland football match. And the nature of football fans is that they turn up about 10 minutes before kick-off. They like to have a few bevies. I know I'm stereotyping and sweeping generalisation, but it's true. Particularly in Scotland as well, they love a few pints. And of course, people weren't getting in until half-time because they were having to look at the vaccine passports. And all of a sudden, you got thousands of people. So it wasn't a staggered, practical way of using vaccine passports. Albeit, I sort of disagree with you about the efficacy of being double jabbed and being able to prove it, or having a lateral flow test and being able to demonstrate on the day that you're symptom-free, you're COVID-free, because we know that you can still transmit COVID, but you're less likely to do it. So what you're doing is you're mitigating, you're giving yourself as much chance as possible by going into an arena with, I think, socially minded, like-minded individuals who understand it's important to do what you can to protect society. And I don't see the problem. And I know you said you don't think it works, but I would ask you to demonstrate that with some evidence, because I think it can only work. I'm not saying it's foolproof, but you're less likely to transmit. So if you are with 1,000 other people less likely to transmit, then surely that is working.
I didn't say I didn't think it worked. I said that there was a 70-page evidence report that the Scottish Government commissioned into the efficacy of vaccine passports in Scotland, which of course have been around for much longer in Scotland than in England, and they'll be implemented next Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe. And they actually found that they had no measurable effect on stopping coronavirus transmission. And I accept your point about other countries, but I think it's probably important to look at the four nations of Britain, where we've got the similar structures in place with vaccines and things like that. And if the evidence in Scotland, one of the countries in Great Britain, is showing that they're not that effective, then what's the point in upsetting lots of people to implement them?
Well, I'm just going back to what Danny was saying about it, that in Scotland, where they estimated it, did they do it at, say, venues where people had to wait 10 minutes, were not, what was the system like? Was it a proper, structured programme, or wasn't it? Because if you do it on a system that isn't actually working properly, then you'll find that it won't work. So how structured was it? They're doing them in France, in other countries, Austria. I mean, that's not going so well for them there. But they're working in places like France. And how do you measure whether they're working or not? How do you know? What's the gauge to see if they're working?
Look, I'm clearly not one of the scientists from the programme which they tested it on. I'm just going from the evidence that I looked at earlier today. I think another interesting point when it comes to vaccine passports are the parts of society who will actually find it more difficult to produce vaccine passports than others, and the parts of society where we've seen a lot of vaccine hesitancy, and therefore vaccine passports could have real limitations on how they move about their lives when they're going into big venues. So, for example, I read in the Telegraph yesterday that just 14% of white adults are unvaccinated, jumps up to 26% of British Asian adults and 40% of black British adults. So actually, there's a lot of health inequalities in this country, and it's not clear to me that more authority is the answer to the ethnicity gap in vaccines.
Well, the other option, though, is a negative lateral flow test. That's got nothing to do with what colour you are or anything. So as part of this scheme, there is the COVID pass, so you've got either the vaccination status or you've got the lateral flow test. I mean, they're free. What's the problem?
I think it's more of a principle that up until now, we've pretty much been able to go anywhere in the country without proving our medical status. And call me irrational, but I feel uncomfortable moving into a society where we have to prove our medical status in order to enter certain spaces.
Well, I'd be uncomfortable you coming into my house without taking a lateral flow test.
But that's your private home, isn't it? We're not talking about public society. If businesses choose to implement vaccine passports independently because that's what the businesses want to do, and private individuals like yourself, then fair enough, but they have a choice. If the business doesn't want to do it and it's being forced upon them, and the government is making them do it, I think that's wrong. So it's all about individual choice, isn't it?
Albie, it's almost, although we don't have bombs dropping on us, it's almost like we are at a war footing where, as a society, we have to live in extraordinary times and take extraordinary personal measures, in my view. When you say it's almost like there's a slippery slope you're concerned about, that if the government implement this, then is it going to be something more permanent than just a temporary thing? Is that a concern of yours?
It's something which could happen, but that's not my immediate concern. I feel uncomfortable moving towards a society where we have to start proving our medical status in order to enter spaces.
So what could happen next, then, that would make you even feel more uncomfortable?
Well, I suppose if it was extended to more spaces other than just the initial ones, if we were talking about having to enter the studio here, having to enter supermarkets and things like that, a lockdown on the unvaccinated, essentially, I would feel very uncomfortable.
You've made a big leap from supermarkets to lockdown.
You said let's extrapolate it, so extrapolate it to the nth degree.
It was one hell of a leap between the supermarket.
You asked me to extrapolate. Well, you didn't tell me when to stop.
Or it was a gradual.
Well, I wanted him to carry on. I mean, this could have ended up on the moon. This was great.
It's gone from.
When would you like me to stop?
Well, a gradual extrapolation. It's gone from supermarket ban to being locked down under house arrest almost.
I just said I think that is a pretty logical extrapolation that you can make from vaccine passports to a lockdown on the unvaccinated, judging from what we've seen on mainland Europe, in Austria and Germany. I don't think it is an outrageous jump to make because we have literally seen it happen in mainland Europe.
You wouldn't support a lockdown on the unvaccinated?
No, I would not support lockdown.
Even though they potentially could be going around and indirectly infecting people that could then lose their lives.
It's about a principle of the society that I want us to live in, and I do not want to live in a society where we're locking people down and restricting people's movement based on medical status. I mean, imagine if we said we're going to restrict the movement of people who are overweight because they're going to put a strain on the NHS.
But it's not airborne. Me being fat, you're not going to catch fatness, are you?
Well, let's hope not, otherwise we've all got it.
But
that's the point.
But the whole
You've infected us
You're
all.
not going to leave the studio. You're not going to leave the studio with a pair of breasts like me, are you?
No, but that's not the
Or
argument.
me, actually.
That's not the argument that's being made. The argument that is often made is protect the NHS. So you could make a similar argument. I'm not saying it's the right argument. I actually think it's the wrong argument. The argument is that to protect the NHS, you could limit the movement, the interactions of people who have health conditions in favour of the healthy, so that the NHS doesn't get clogged up.
Well, listen, can I just say, but this is kind of what we did actually, but the other way round, didn't we? So if you think that's wrong, then you would also think that it was wrong that we said that those who were clinically vulnerable should shield for a certain period of time, because that's what we did, didn't we? It was the other way round. It was clinically vulnerable, you shield, but everyone else is going to go about their business. Now, most people have been vaccinated. If it were the other way round, you wouldn't support it, but you would have supported it the other way.
I think we can't compare when we recommended people shielded at the beginning of the pandemic to where we are now.
Why not?
When most people are vaccinated. Because there were so many unknowns back then. We didn't know how deadly it was. We didn't have effective treatments. We didn't even know how to treat this disease. Hospital beds in hospitals were being crowded with people. Now the situation is totally different. We've got vaccines for those who want them. We've got antiretroviral drugs to treat people who don't want to take vaccines. We have a wealth of information now which makes the situation materially different, which is why I don't think you can make that
Well,
comparison.
you say that, but Omicron right now is, in your words, unknown. So why would you then object to us going back to the situation in a slightly different way, because we don't know about this new variant? We don't know yet. So far, so good. It sounds like it's a lot milder. It sounds like it is. There's no records of the cytokine storm, which is the COVID-19 has proved that every single variant so far has the propensity for this. But just as you said, it's unknown. So why would you object to those sort of measures coming in for something that's totally unknown?
But what we do know is that 95% of people in Britain have coronavirus antibodies.
Not to this, though.
That includes
not to this variant.
Coronavirus antibodies, and those antibodies, just like the vaccine, have some effect on Omicron, maybe less effect on Omicron. But there's no evidence to show that Omicron actually evades vaccines enough to kill people. Maybe the disease is just a little bit more.
Well, the thing is,
nasty.
though, how long do we wait? That's the thing. You could wait for too long. And as we know, one thing we do know is that it doubles every 2 to 3 days, which is twice the speed of the other one. So if we are right and it's mild, then that's great. It could be a vaccine, which is my point. But if we're wrong, then we're in trouble. Right, let's move on, because after the break, it's time for the great British debate this hour. It's 2 years since Boris Johnson led the Conservatives to an 80-seat majority in the House of Commons. 2 years on, he's under pressure in the face of multiple controversies, including COVID restrictions, Downing Street parties and flat renovations. So I'm asking, 2 years of Boris Johnson, is it success or failure? Send us an email, gbnews@gbnews.uk. Tell us what you think. You can also send us a tweet now at GBNews. There's a poll up right now asking you that very question, so cast your vote. But first, it's the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, in the UK is looking largely dry across England and Wales, with rain clearing from Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. Southwest England will often be cloudy through this afternoon, with perhaps the odd spot of drizzle, turning increasingly windy across the far west, but very mild for the time of year. Over to southeast England, and it should remain mostly dry here this afternoon, with just a few glimmers of sunshine for a lucky few. Moving over to Cardiff, there'll be a lot of cloud across Wales, particularly in the north and west. Some sheltered eastern spots may see a little sunshine. Across the Midlands and into northwest England, it will be drier this afternoon compared to this morning, with spells of sunshine developing. Highs will reach around 13 Celsius, which is 55 in Fahrenheit. In the northeast, patchy rain will continue to move northwards away from Newcastle and the surrounding areas. Some brighter skies moving in from the south. Highs reaching around 11 Celsius with generally light southerly winds. Northern Scotland will remain bright for a little longer, with a few showers around. However, thicker cloud in the south, along with outbreaks of rain, will move north later. It'll also continue to become brighter across Northern Ireland as the afternoon moves on. However, it will become very windy as we move into this evening, highs of 12 Celsius. Turning wet and windy across the northwest of the UK this evening, drier elsewhere but breezy and mild. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Right, so today marks 2 years since Boris Johnson's Conservative Party won 315 seats in December's general election, giving them an 80-seat majority in the House of Commons. So 2 years on, the Prime Minister is under pressure in the face of multiple controversies, including COVID restrictions, Downing Street parties and flat renovations. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, 2 years of Boris Johnson, has he been a success or failure? Let's start by taking a look at his top 5 moments, both good and bad. OK, so at number 5 is one to forget, this one. Remember when he shook hands with COVID patients?
Well, Victoria, I can tell you that I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody. You'll be pleased to know, and I continue to shake hands. And
at number 4, no matter what you think of Brexit or the Prime Minister, he did actually get the job done. So when Parliament was at an impasse, he found a way through by making sure all Tory MPs signed up to his deal.
There is only one way to ensure that we get Brexit done, get this thing finished, get us out, do a fantastic free trade deal, and that is to vote for us and for the Conservatives, because you vote for any other party, you risk a coalition of chaos and 2 chaotic referendums next.
At number 3, Boris might be getting terrible press at the moment for the Downing Street parties, but at least he agreed to help police with their inquiries.
The evidence I can see is that people in this building have stayed within the rules. If that turns out not to be the case, and people wish to bring allegations to my attention or to the police or whoever, then of course there will be proper sanctions.
In at number 2, remember this one, Peppa Pig Gate, a moment that will live long in most people's memories.
Yesterday I went, as we all must, to Peppa Pig World. I don't know if you've been to Peppa Pig World. Who's been to? Hands up anyone who's been to Peppa Pig World. Not enough.
And finally, the top Boris moment has to be the vaccine rollout. It's probably one of his biggest successes.
But I think the UK continues to be in a much stronger position. We continue to be in a strong position, largely thanks to the speed of the vaccine rollout.
So let's now speak to Joanne Nadler, a former Conservative press officer and political commentator. Joanne, welcome. So,
Hi.
What do you think? Do you think Boris has had a good 2 years overall, if you looked at the big picture?
Well, I think it's been a very mixed bag, and I think the jury's still out, really, Nana. I mean, you were absolutely right, of course, to talk about that considerable achievement, considerable technical and constitutional achievement in succeeding in finishing the job of getting Brexit done. And I don't think that we should easily forget that, because if you recall the previous 3 years before Boris won that election and before he became Prime Minister, the awful state of the country in terms of the rows between Remainers and Brexiteers, which seemed to permeate every part of our life. And the fact that, bizarrely, the policy that the majority of people had voted for was being thwarted on all counts, from the judiciary, from the opposition, from the media. And so I think to drive that through, it cannot be forgotten about. That was a considerable achievement. However, I suppose one of the problems with the idea of getting Brexit done is that once you've got past that hurdle of achieving that constitutional step, there are debates about what it means for our domestic policy agenda, our foreign policy agenda. And I mean, here I think we get into much more sort of cloudy territory as to what we can describe as a success or otherwise. And obviously on top of that, then we've had this huge event in the shape of the COVID pandemic. So I think it's a very complicated picture. But if, like me, you wanted the Brexit success to lead to a kind of radical policy agenda, and we've heard a lot of talk about that, we've heard about levelling up, but I think at the moment it's very hard to see how that's really effectively been rolled out. It's still in gestation, I guess.
If you were to pick a sort of the top Boris moment and a good moment, which one would you pick?
Well, I think I've already articulated that. I think actually achieving getting out of Europe was that moment, but I just don't feel that that's been successfully or that we've properly built on that yet. Now, as I say, that has an awful lot to do with events unforeseen in the shape of the pandemic that came along. And you were right, of course, to refer to the vaccine rollout and how successful that has been in this country. And it shouldn't be forgotten that one of the reasons for that success is that we were free of a lot of the red tape and restrictions that being within the European Union would have required of us.
What about
so I think that all of that could be seen as part of the same project.
What about his worst moment then?
Well, I think it's not so much a moment. I think it's more a question of drift. But there was a lot of promise arising out of Brexit for putting Britain on a different footing in terms of its international reputation, and creating within the country a kind of less restricted, red tape sort of economic climate, making us more competitive, establishing things like free ports, of which there's been some discussion, but it hasn't really been properly enacted yet. I think perversely what we've seen, and this is largely as a result of COVID, is that all this idea that Britain was going to become nimble and competitive and perhaps have lower taxes, whilst also addressing some of those deep social issues that were raised as a result of the Brexit vote and this idea of levelling up, that actually we're moving towards a society which seems to be more highly taxed, more regulated, and in many ways resembles those societies within the European Union that we left that organisation in order to avoid.
Well, listen, Joanne, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Joanne Nadler. She's a former Conservative press officer and a political commentator. Well, we'll be speaking to my panel very shortly, but get your thoughts in as well. Still to come, we'll continue the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, 2 years on from Boris Johnson's landslide election victory, has his time so far been a success or a failure? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
I'm Polly Middlehurst, and these are your latest GB News headlines this hour. So the Prime Minister has been accused of leading a culture of disregard for COVID rules. That's after a new picture emerged of Boris Johnson taking part in an online Downing Street quiz flanked by his colleagues during last year's lockdown. At the same time, London was in Tier 2, which meant there should have been no mixing of households indoors, apart from support bubbles. The new COVID restrictions are expected to come into law this week in England, with the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer confirming his party will support the government in Tuesday's vote. The booster programme is also being extended to curb the rise in Omicron cases. Millions of people aged between 30 and 39 will also be offered third jabs in England from tomorrow. Meanwhile, Scotland's hospitality sector is stepping up its call for financial support after the government reintroduced COVID restrictions. Businesses in Scotland say they're seeing mass cancellations and will need to help survive the Christmas period. The government's now considering tighter measures after new self-isolation rules came into force. And the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has confirmed a further £75 million in aid will go to Afghanistan. It follows talks at the G7 meeting in Liverpool about what action could be taken to address the worsening humanitarian situation there. Officials say no funding will go directly to the Taliban and charities will be targeted instead. In sport, Lewis Hamilton has missed out on a record-breaking 8th Formula One World Championship win after a dramatic end to the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix today. Hamilton led from the start, but his rival Max Verstappen was able to overtake him in the final lap to secure his first title. Mercedes has lodged 2 protests with Formula One's governing body over the race results. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
So we're back to our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, 2 years since Boris Johnson's landslide election victory. God, it feels like a lot longer than that, doesn't it? So since then, has it been a success or failure? What do you think? You've heard from the expert. Now it's time to hear what my panel thinks. So Danny and Albie are joining me. Roy, I'm going to start with you because, Albie, you are a Conservative against racism commentator and stuff. So talk to me. What do you think?
So I think had the last week not happened and things had continued moving in the positive direction that we were, I think this entire conversation would be framed very differently, wouldn't it? But we can't take away what's happened over the last week. But over the last 2 years since we had that thumping victory, I think it was today, 2 years ago, the Prime Minister has actually achieved a lot. You know, we had the pandemic, we had a fantastic vaccine rollout, we've had the fastest economic recovery in Europe, we developed the AstraZeneca vaccine at cost price and distributed it around the world, and we're going to have the biggest investment in the railways since the 1800s. So those are some of the highlights. The last week did happen. The Owen Paterson scandal did also happen. We can't forget those things. But I think we'll look back in history and look at the big successes that the Prime Minister has had, along with some of the failings as well. But I just hope after Christmas we can really just get our acts together and focus on delivering for the people of Britain.
Is he history?
Is he history?
Is he history? You said look back on history, so I'm wondering, do you think he's history?
He's very much present, Nana.
You think? OK, let's see. Danny, what do you make of it?
Semantics, darling. OK, I think you're right. I think Boris Johnson getting Brexit done has saved thousands of lives because we had the autonomy to go it alone and create this vaccine. Yes, we could have... I think the EU had this collective, European Union, pharmaceutical, whatever, I can't remember what it was called, and we could have opted out of it. And that's what a lot of Remainers say. Well, we could have opted out of it. Tony Blair, who hasn't got any humility, he hasn't got an ounce of humility in his body. He didn't even give Boris Johnson credit for autonomously creating our own vaccine rollouts. And Tony Blair said, well, we could have always opted out. But I would say, Mr. Blair, name me one other European country that did opt out. That's just such a whitewash. I think that's a really big achievement of Boris Johnson's. I know Labour are all of a sudden 6 or 7 points ahead in the polls, and I've always been saying that people away from like this metropolitan bubble, like I drove 93 miles to get here from the Midlands, 2 hours in traffic, and I've always maintained that people where I live aren't that bothered about Boris Johnson's wallpaper, aren't that bothered about Zoom quizzes at Christmas, but I'm beginning to wonder whether they are bothered. I'm beginning to wonder, he's 6 or 7 points down in the polls, and I'm beginning to wonder whether they are bothered. Is it time for a change? Who will replace him?
Well, do you not think that it's like one of those things, it's like one of those fish. One fish couldn't kill you, but lots of them together biting and gnawing away at you constantly. What are they called? They're like...
Piranha.
Piranha, that's what it is. It's like the piranha. I'm calling the media piranhas. No, it is like those little fish nibbling away, let's bite a little bit here, and there's like 100 of them all coming at the same time. And when they do that to you, they scavenge you. And this is what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing a situation that would make me want to get rid of a leader. So having a party, or not even him, but other people in a very, very big building, having a party that you may or may not have known about, to me, that's not, let's make him resign for that. Even though the environment wasn't there, shouldn't be any parties or gatherings and so on and so forth. I know most people I know broke the rules even slightly. Do you know how many people were in one of my friends' support bubbles? Oh, yeah, you're in my support bubble. You're thinking, hang on, you're not supposed to have, So I think we all took those rules to a certain extreme, but Boris wasn't even involved in that, one of the parties that we hear of, right? I don't know about the rest of them, I'm really not that bothered. But this isn't get rid of the leader. What really annoyed me, I think Peppa Pig was slightly more annoying to me, but then we all get that moment where the auto cue doesn't work or it slips up and then it's recorded and everybody can see you doing an embarrassing thing. We all get a moment where we sort of lose the plot. I'm not angry about him for Peppa Pig. I'm actually more concerned at these constant piranha biting behaviour that seems to be very timely. Why wait a year before you tell someone about a party? I don't get it.
Well, the reason why the party story came out, of course, is because the Mirror revealed it, and I imagine
a year later,
had the Mirror not revealed it, we would never have known about it.
But a year later, why would you wait a year? Why don't you just, if you know about it, why would you not just say it there and then?
Well, the Mirror is a left-wing newspaper, so they're no supporters of the government, and I imagine they will have been sitting on this story for a while and waiting for the opportunity where they can inflict the most damage on the government, and I think they found it. Well, looking at where we are in the polls, I think they've hit us quite hard.
Obviously that's what you think, but we don't actually know. But the fact is that the party was a year ago. Why bring it out now? I still ask the same question.
I don't buy into that sort of almost conspiracy that the Mirror sit on things. They sit on bad news and wait for an opportune moment, almost 12 months. I think the Mirror, if they had this 11 months ago or 12 months ago, they would have run it. So I'm beginning to wonder whether there's a coup d'etat, a mutiny,
well, exactly,
as it were, at Downing Street, and maybe people are sitting on little golden nuggets, like a piranha bite, your analogy. To analogize it, maybe there are loads of little piranha bites coming his way, and I wonder whether there's a coup d'etat. I think the Mirror would have run it on day one a year ago if they had it.
Well, you see, that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. And I don't like the taste of that coup. I don't like the sound of that, because actually, if I look at the achievements of Boris Johnson, whether I vote for him or not, I'm seeing some of those achievements. Many could not do that. Theresa May could not get Brexit done. David Cameron ran for the hills, didn't he? Where was he? Where is he now? I mean, Tony Blair, his disaster with things like Iraq. I mean, there are so many. If I look at other prime ministers who are now sort of chipping away at Boris Johnson, I think, well, your legacy was far worse. How dare you even open your mouth? And then, should they remove Boris Johnson, who are they going to put in there? Who? I don't know Rishi Sunak very well. I don't know what he's about. As for Liz Truss, she's more liberal probably than even Boris. I'm wondering, and if these guys who take his place, should they do that, don't win the election, then you've got Keir Starmer, and I have no idea what Keir Starmer stands for.
I think all the speculation about Boris Johnson no longer being Prime Minister is, quite frankly, for the birds. We've not seen any prominent Conservative MP come out and say he should stand down.
No.
Steve Baker was doing the media round this morning, famous, of course, for being one of the perpetrators of Theresa May's downfall. One of the things he said was that he wasn't interested in taking down a Prime Minister, and that everyone in the Conservative Party wants the Prime Minister to succeed. I want the Prime Minister to succeed. The country needs a Prime Minister to succeed. He's not going anywhere. He just needs to focus on what the people need and the priorities of the people, recovering from coronavirus, delivering a high-wage, high-growth economy, delivering on levelling up. And if he can do that before the next general election, then we'll win in 2023 or 2024.
And just briefly, you mustn't forget that people despise Boris Johnson. I know that Tory parties polarised with left-wing. I get all of that, and Margaret Thatcher was a polarising figure that was despised. But I haven't seen in my recent lifetime a politician more despised. And I think that permeates and manifests itself in some of the treatment that the left-wing media are pumping out for Boris Johnson.
So you think that a lot of the media... It does. I mean, it does, and I think...
Because of Brexit.
You've got to be careful with that as well, because in the case of people like that, as even in the case of people like Trump, what happens if people start to feel sorry for that person if you continue with the attacks? So let's find out what you've been saying at home, and lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Tia says, absolute failure. Boris proves daily he is anything but a Conservative. We'll never make the mistake of voting for him again. Peter says, Brexit, then the pandemic. Johnson hasn't done bad at all, considering the above. That is actually true. We've got to consider that. Who else would have done a better job? Richard says, the vaccine programme, we were way ahead of the EU and other countries. Also, the lockdown timings were mostly impeccable. That was the biggest challenge and dealt with as well as anyone could. John says, he's not done great, but then not many world leaders have faced what he has faced, for sure. Monty says he's gone from hero to zero in 2 years. He must be the most hated Conservative Prime Minister this country has ever had. Yes. Nick says, failure. Brexit isn't a success. Huge gas bills, taxes have stalled the economy, and inflation is rising. That's before we get to the shenanigans. Well, that's what people are saying. There's a poll-up as well on Twitter, and throughout the show we're asking, what do you think Boris Johnson is, his success or failure? And currently 75% of you say Boris Johnson's tenure so far has been a failure. I would have, it's interesting. It's interesting that they're saying that. The panel, they feel that mostly that it's been a failure.
But again, I said at the beginning of when you first asked me about this question, if we didn't have the context of the last week, I think we'd be having a very differently framed conversation. I think had the last week happened, I genuinely think that poll would be quite different.
Do you believe in the polls, though? I don't believe in them.
The polls, GB News polls?
No, not GB News polls. If we look at the so-called polls outside.
These independent Ipsos, Mori,
Ipsos, all those things there. Do you believe that the Labour Party are 6 or 7 or 8 points ahead?
Well, I don't see what's happened in the last 2 months that's done a 180 to make them from 8 points behind to 8 points. That's a 16-point swing. I don't get it. I think Boris Johnson has achieved a hell of a lot. He's got Brexit done. He's right and also such a charismatic guy. That guy is the personification of charisma, and I don't think he could have got the Tory party an 80-seat majority. So Brexit is a massive thing for me, and also the vaccine rollout. He saved lives.
Wow, still to come after the break. It's time to look at what's making the headlines across the globe. Foreign affairs expert James Marlowe will be in the studio today. And what's happening? Warnings from G7 leaders that there'll be serious consequences if Russia invades Ukraine. But first, let's find out what's happening with the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, in the UK is looking largely dry across England and Wales, with rain clearing from Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. Southwest England will often be cloudy through this afternoon, with perhaps the odd spot of drizzle, turning increasingly windy across the far west, but very mild for the time of year. Over to southeast England, and it should remain mostly dry here this afternoon, with just a few glimmers of sunshine for a lucky few. Moving over to Cardiff, there'll be a lot of cloud across Wales, particularly in the north and west. Some sheltered eastern spots may see a little sunshine. Across the Midlands and into northwest England, it will be drier this afternoon compared to this morning, with spells of sunshine developing. Highs will reach around 13 Celsius, which is 55 in Fahrenheit. In the northeast, patchy rain will continue to move northwards away from Newcastle and the surrounding areas. Some brighter skies moving in from the south. Highs reaching around 11 Celsius with generally light southerly winds. Northern Scotland will remain bright for a little longer, with a few showers around. However, thicker cloud in the south, along with outbreaks of rain, will move north later. It'll also continue to become brighter across Northern Ireland as the afternoon moves on. However, it will become very windy as we move into this evening, highs of 12 Celsius. Turning wet and windy across the northwest of the UK this evening, drier elsewhere but breezy and mild. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good afternoon. If you've just tuned in, where on earth have you been? It's time to take a look at what's making the headlines across the globe. And on the agenda today, a serious threat from Russia. British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says that the world's largest economies are united in warning Russia that an invasion of Ukraine would have massive consequences. I'm joined by foreign affairs expert James Marlowe. James, welcome to the programme. Now, how likely is it then that Russia will invade Ukraine?
Nana, for the last few months, Russian troops have been building up on the border with Ukraine. I have previously said on GB News, 94,000 Russian troops are right on the lines between Ukraine and Russia. Since that time, Western intelligence believes it's more than 100,000 troops. We're talking about 1,200 tanks, artillery, aircraft, more than 500 pieces of different aircraft in the Black Sea, submarines, ships, boats. This is a great concern to the Ukrainian people, but more so, it's a concern to the West, America, Britain, and in particular, NATO. How come? Because they're trying to work out what is in Putin's mind right now. Now, I've come up with 3 different possibilities. Number one is that this is a smokescreen. In other words, it's a classic military strategy to divert the attention from the opposition in order for you to do something else. What is that something else? I don't know. But nevertheless, something else could be in Putin's mind to divert that attention. Number 2 is that perhaps it's just testing the water. In other words, to see how the West would react if there was this massive build-up of troops on the Ukrainian border with a possibility of an invasion of Ukraine. Now, we know for the last year, Joe Biden, as far as foreign policy goes, has looked quite weak. His popularity has plummeted. This could be a way for Joe Biden for his poll numbers to go up and for the Democrat Party to get more support. Now, last night I was watching a press conference. Of course, he came out about the strong tornadoes across 6 states which killed so many people in America. And the last question was aimed at, is it true, Mr. President, that if the Russians invade Ukraine, that American troops will be sent in? Is that still on the table? And he replied, that was never on the table. But if Russia does go into Ukraine, there will be the most devastating, crippling sanctions against Russia that they've never seen anything like that before. Sounds a bit like Donald Trump speaking. Now, if there are those sanctions, it's also going to hit the EU and it's going to hit Britain. How come? Well, to give you one example, there is a Russian oil line, pipeline, which is being built at this point from Russia to Germany, which will serve the whole of the EU and possibly Britain, depending upon what deal that we get. That will be off the table. That will be finished if there are crippling sanctions. But besides that, we're also talking about really bad economic dire consequences for Europe and Britain if there are. The third possibility...
Well, why would we be suffering? I mean, apart from the fact they won't supply us with the gas or whatever it is we're getting through this pipeline, why would there be dire consequences for us here in the UK if sanctions were put against Russia?
There would be a need for oil, petrol in this country.
But we are supposedly going away from all of that, so surely we can start working out how we can create our own energy. Isn't that what we're all doing?
Yes, that's the objective of this Conservative government, led by Boris, of course, but we're a long way from that. And that's the reason why we've got ourselves into a little bit of a pickle in terms of the rising of prices of gasoline and in particular at the petrol pumps.
And why Ukraine? Why Ukraine? Is there any specific reason why they're targeting Ukraine?
Yes, and that brings me on to my third and final point, which is that from Russia's point of view, and this is how the Russian media are actually reporting this, completely different ways you can imagine from Western media, and that is they are extremely concerned. When the breakdown of the East-West finished around 1989, 1990, there was a deal done between the West and Russia at the time, the former Soviet Union, which then became, of course, Russia. The deal was done that NATO would not expand. Now, NATO says it's not responsible if Czechoslovakia, as it was known at the time, now Czech Republic and Slovakia, Bulgaria and Poland and Romania and all the other countries, it's not their fault that they want to join NATO. Now, Ukraine wants to join NATO, and NATO have actually been encouraging it to a certain point. This has brought on a great concern for the Russian government and, in particular, some of the Russian people, because they say that NATO is now an empire. It's much, much larger than what it was during the time of the Soviet Union. We are now real concerned. We have to protect our borders, and the only way to do that is to invade Ukraine. So that's the third possibility. But, of course, anything is possible as we head into 2022.
Well, it feels like, to be honest, that they're sort of poking the bear, aren't they, really? They're kind of poking to see what's going to happen, but I have no idea why they would want to do that at all, and at the expense of war, potentially, and anything else. And James, thank you so much for clearing that up for us. It's always good to talk to you. That's the fabulous James Marlowe. He's our foreign affairs expert. If you've just tuned in, you're watching me, Nana Akua, on GB News. We've got more to come in the next hour. Good afternoon, I'm Nana Akua, and for this next hour, me and my panel, we're taking on some of those big stories that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course, it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's broadcaster Danny Kelly, and also commentator and co-founder of Conservatives Against Racism, Abi Amankona. Now, still to come, each Sunday at 5, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP, or someone who's had an extremely interesting career to take a look at their life after the job. We'll talk the highs, the lows, and of course, the lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today, after a dramatic end to the Formula One season, we'll be looking back, taking a look on the outside of motorsport with racing driver and former Top Gear Stig Ben Collins. And the Great British Debate this hour, should we put a limit on the number of children each couple can have to save the planet? The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were awarded limiting their family to 2 children by UK charity Population Matters. But Tesla and SpaceX, Elon Musk, says that we should all have lots of babies to save civilization. Have your say, GBviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet us at GBnews. But first, it's your latest headlines.
I'm Polly Middlehurst. It's 5 o'clock and here are your latest GB News headlines. The UK COVID alert level has been increased from 3 to 4. That's happened within the last few minutes following the rapid increase in Omicron cases across the UK. New restrictions already in place to curb the spread of the disease are expected to become law next week in England. The booster programme is also being extended, with millions of people aged between 30 and 39 being offered third jabs from tomorrow. The country is said to be facing an inevitable wave of infections, with cases of the new variant already being treated in hospitals.
We stopped being devoted to COVID after the vaccination levels rose sufficiently to reduce hospital numbers. And we've been trying to clear the backlog, but the fact is, we haven't made much of an inroad into it, and it's going to grow clearly if people end up in hospital again with things that are related to Omicron. And that's very likely, even though Omicron appears to be milder.
Well, Scotland's hospitality sector is stepping up its call for financial support after the government reintroduced COVID restrictions. Businesses are saying they're seeing mass cancellations and will need help to survive the Christmas period. The government's now considering tighter measures after new self-isolation rules came into force. Paul Waterson, a spokesperson for the Scottish Licensed Trade Association, says he's shocked and he's worried about what businesses will do next.
Came as a bolt of the blue for us. We had geared up, many people had got food in and so on, and was geared up for a really busy weekend. This is the worst scenario we could have. We're open, but people are being told not to come in. It takes us back to the very beginning of all this, when you might remember that the Prime Minister said that pubs would stay open, but people shouldn't go in them.
The Prime Minister has been accused of leading a culture of disregard for COVID rules. It comes after a new image emerged of Boris Johnson taking part in what seemed like an online quiz flanked by his colleagues in Downing Street during last year's lockdown. There was no evidence of social distancing in the image and masks weren't being worn. At the time, London, which was in Tier 2, meant there shouldn't have been any mixing of households indoors apart from in support bubbles. Well, Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, has said in reaction Boris Johnson is unfit to lead the country, and some people in Nottinghamshire agree.
I really do think that he is making a lot of mistakes. I don't think he should be in government. I'm not sure that I think the Conservative Party should be in government, to be honest. They've all broken so many rules.
Well, I think it's wrong what they did, and, you know.
If he doesn't do anything, he's going to get blamed, and if he does something, he's going to get blamed anyway, isn't he?
I don't see anybody else to lead the country, really, at the moment. There's no other leaders out there.
Away from COVID, a gun has been recovered from a scene in West London where a man was shot and killed by police. Officers had been responding to reports of a person carrying a firearm entering a bank and a bookmaker's in Kensington yesterday. Witnesses say they heard 3 shots ring out. The man was treated by emergency crews but died at the scene. The WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, has reportedly suffered a stroke in prison. His fiancée, Stella Morris, says it happened during the High Court battle over his extradition to the United States. She says the stroke was triggered by stress over his future. He's currently being held at HMP Belmarsh, a high-security prison in London. His lawyers are expecting to take his case now to the Supreme Court. The Foreign Secretary has promised a further £75 million in aid to Afghanistan. It follows discussions in the G7 meeting in Liverpool about what action could be taken to address the worsening humanitarian crisis there and how to engage with the Taliban. It brings the UK's financial commitment to Afghanistan to £286 million this year alone. Officials say no funding will go directly through the Taliban and charities will be used instead. And in sport, Lewis Hamilton has narrowly missed out on a record-breaking 8th Formula One World Championship win after a dramatic end to the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix today. Hamilton was leading from the start, but his rival, Max Verstappen, was able to overtake him in the final lap to secure the incredible win and his first ever title. Mercedes, meanwhile, has lodged 2 protests with Formula One's governing body over the race results. I'll bring you the latest news headlines in half an hour. Until then, Nana Akua is here.
It's time for Outside, the part of the show where we talk to former politicians, celebrities or anyone who's had an extremely interesting career. We'll talk highs, lows and what comes next on the outside. So you saw it there after Max Verstappen became Formula One world champion at today's Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. We're talking motorsport. So joining me today is racing driver and Stig, Ben Collins. He's raced in the 24-hour Le Mans British touring cars and works as a Hollywood stunt driver. Ben joins me now. Hello, Ben. Welcome.
Hi. Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. It's so good to actually see you because I had no idea when they had the whole thing. Who is the Stig? Who is the Stig? I had no idea who he was, and there you are. Here you are talking to me now. What was it like working on Top Gear and being a person sort of in disguise, incognito? Nobody knew who you were, or did?
For many years, hiding behind a helmet, so possibly better that way. But it was great fun. When I took up that challenge, I was fortunate to get the job in the first place and pass muster at an audition down at the Dunsfield track, the Top Gear secret location in Surrey, not so secret now. It was an incredible journey because I knew that the whole character was based around secrecy and to try and preserve that for as long as possible, with all the media trying to find out who it was. And in the end, it was in the top 10 searches on Google, and it eventually sort of unravelled. It's sort of snowball effect of whispers and rumours, but it was a great journey while I was there.
Wow, what a fabulous gig to get as well. Let's talk more about you, though. How did you get into motorsport? When did it all sort of start for you?
Well, for me, it started on a kind of small version of Clarkson's Farm, which I've loved watching recently. And I grew up in the wilderness. I didn't get into go-kart racing at an early age, unlike Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, who've just been battling it out. So I didn't get into racing until I was 19. So I just used to get my hands on whatever bits of kit were available. Usually that was the sort of farm quad bike or tractor, and just terrorize these machines, I suppose, in some ways learning a little bit of car control along the way. But the bug was firmly in from an early stage. And the first time I got out onto a track, I was 18 years old at Silverstone in a single-seater and just took to it like a duck to water. Got a racing license, and away I went on a journey to try and reach Formula One.
What was your first car? Because my first car was a left-hand drive Mark III Cortina that my father gave me on my 17th birthday. He said, Nana, happy birthday. It needs about £500 worth of work to it because otherwise it's a death trap. Happy birthday. What was your first car?
Man. Yeah, that's vintage, organic driving there. You got no safety features. It's just your hands and your feet. Actually, for me, I had a Honda Civic, which was wonderful. A really high-revving VTEC engine that I suppose personified that era, the 90s, when Senna was racing with Honda and they had these incredibly high-revving engines. Honda coming back today in force, obviously winning the championship. So, yeah, that was my first car. It didn't feel like an F1 car there by any stretch. And again, I terrorized it. But I've learned to calm down a little bit and be more sensible. But fortunately, I still get to go racing and enjoy these cars to the max.
Now, you also used to be in the armed forces as well. I mean, what did you do there? And has it influenced what you've become?
Yeah, so I spent a few years in the Army Reserve, which was a fantastic experience, life-changing, really. With motorsport, a lot of the time your result is very much dictated by the level of equipment you have. If the car has the performance, you can get the most out of it, and you can win. But sometimes that it's not always there for you. Whereas with the military, the training and the personal performance is very much much more a mental game, and it's whatever you can take out of yourself. There's no inhibition except for how far you're willing to push yourself. So I really enjoyed being around like-minded people who were also, making the most of themselves. And we were challenged physically, mentally for that time, and made some great friends there. And also ended up getting involved with driver training because there's a lot of guys and girls in the military that are exposed to all different dangers, and one of them is the risks of driving. So it's fantastic getting involved there with teaching them how to use the cars they were given more safely and be able to deploy overseas. Just try and give them as much grounding as possible before they went away.
So your sort of motorsport career, did you actually race in motorsports and do things like that?
Yeah, so from 19, I was on the single-seater ladder in the dream of reaching Formula One. I nearly got there, so I ended up racing in something equivalent to Formula 3000, and I switched across to Le Mans 24-hour racing in this 220-mile-an-hour monster called an Ascari, an LMP1, sort of top category car that was with a Formula One engine powering it, more downforce than a Formula One car, so it was an incredibly fast beast. And from there, I moved around a little bit into GT racing, similar to this Ferrari you're looking at now, racing around Thruxton, places like that. So I've been very fortunate. I've had a very diverse career. I had a 7-year break, which I have to say was not intentional, just ended up doing other things, working in movies and getting involved writing books. I'm now back with a vengeance, racing with a Czech team called Praga, who've got a one-make series. My teammate, Jay Morton, ex-SAS from the Who Dares Wins programme. And we're really having our own battle royale. It's incredibly tight at the front, and I'm really excited about next season.
Yeah, sounds amazing. I love cars. Seriously, I absolutely love driving. One of my favourite things. I used to have a very fast car. Then I got rid of it because it was too much like high maintenance. But I want to ask you, because you mentioned the movies, and I know that was it The Quantum of Solace, or you've done some James Bond stuff as well. Yep. What was that like? And so you were the person driving those cars?
Yes, it's such a privilege. I've worked on the last 4 Bond movies, starting with Quantum of Solace. It was a huge elevation for me to go and work on that scale of filming. So I was used to filming with Top Gear. Had quite small crews, limited resources. Don't crash anything. Be really cautious with the kit. Whereas in the movie business, they'll take several cars. I mean, with the Quantum of Solace, we had, I think, 12 Aston Martin DBS cars, all of which were completely destroyed in the making of the movie, all intentional. It was all part of the script. Bond pretty hard on his machinery, but it was pretty amazing. And that level of professionalism that they have in the Bond movies, from the camera team through the stunt department. And in that stunt department, you've got people from all different fields, whether it's bikes, guys who are specialists with fire, with working with heights and everything. It was a real honour joining that kind of crew. And I had no idea where it was going to lead until one day they said, right, Ben, put on the suit, you're driving Bond's car for a bit, and doing some training with Daniel, which was fantastic fun. So it's like a big family, Barbara Broccoli's team. I would never have believed it. All the years watching the movies as a kid growing up, and to find myself in one was, you had to pinch yourself.
Yeah, total, absolute dream come true. And some of those stunts you're talking about, what would you say was the most difficult stunt that you've had to do?
I mean, they're all challenging. I suppose the ones you focus the most on are where there are people on the ground, and the things that you do are really critical to their safety. So that's probably the one where your adrenaline is the highest, because you want the most focus. I would say that the racing background helped with that, because you get those peak moments that are really important. I suppose one of the more curious ones that we really had to think about was I worked on a film called Doctor Strange, when he was texting and driving, which is very naughty, obviously, and distracting. So he spun out of control. So in the movie, he spun out of control and hit a telegraph pole really hard, and then crashed off a ravine. The guys really worked on this one, and it involved me actually crashing this Lamborghini that was, again, brand new. Felt a little bit guilty doing it, and hitting the mark, basically. But we hit the mark, and then the rest was done with a mix of CGI as well as the special effects team that created this rig. So it looked incredibly dangerous, but we worked out a way of doing it the right way. But again, really satisfying to see, although you do have that sense of guilt. But as long as it looks good on screen and everyone walks away, then it's fine. Wow. Well, have you suffered any injuries doing these things? Only in racing, really. I had a massive shunt in 2007, so I broke 4 ribs, a bone in my neck, during a qualifying session when a car behind me, unfortunately, slammed into the back of my car at the end of the session, when a yellow flag was out for another crashed car. So didn't see that one coming. So that was fairly heavy, but in fact, that opened an opportunity. It was that injury that basically put me out of racing for a few months, and that was the time when I got involved in filming for the first time, doubling Nicolas Cage on National Treasure 2 for the biggest car chase in London's history, sliding around in a Mercedes, and again learning the ropes with the stunt crews. So yeah, there's always a silver lining if you can find one. Yeah, that's for sure, for sure. Well, I mean, you've pretty much done everything. You've even written a book. Talk to me about the book. Yeah, so when I left Top Gear, I wrote my first book, The Man in the White Suit. People enjoyed it, and I loved writing, so it was a real pleasure to put that together. And subsequently, we came up with a concept to do a history of Aston Martin, to go behind the scenes on some of the Bond films I've worked on, and to really tell the story of the legends that have been involved with Aston Martin over the years. So it was a deep dive into the research. But I did loads of interviews with lots of different people who had been involved with Stirling Moss when he was at Aston, and they won Le Mans for the first time in 1959. And going back further to the inventor of Chitty Bang Bang, Louis Zabrowski, of Polish heritage, and all the way through to the wartime stories with Tadek Marek, who escaped from Poland at the outbreak of World War II, narrowly managed to get across to North Africa, and then finally across to Britain, where after the war he worked with David Brown to build the modern DB series of cars, and the DB5 was his brainchild, so that became Bond's car. So I loved diving into these stories and finding out what the origins were, really telling the stories of these amazing people, these amazing inventors, who I suppose almost lived the real life Bond, is pretty much what I discovered. So yeah, it's been fun writing it, and it gave me something to do during lockdown. Amazing. You know what, my son Ivory, he's 4. His favourite show is Top Gear and Grand Tour. He loves James May and everybody. You know what you need to do next? You need to write a children's book with fast cars and supercars, because I can't find one anywhere, and he would love that. Absolutely. All right, it's a deal. Maybe set it in space, because I gather that's where the next race is happening. On the moon, I think. For sure. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. Lovely to hear your story. That's Ben Collins. He's a racing driver and the former Stig. Yes, you saw it here on GB News. Still to come, though, it's the Great British Debate this hour. Today, I'm asking, should there be a limit on the amount of children that we have? Founder of Tesla and SpaceX, Elon Musk, says that we should have lots of babies to save civilization.
But the UK charity Population Matters disagrees and thinks that the population needs to fall to save the planet. So what do you think? We'll find out after this.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking largely dry across England and Wales, with rain clearing from Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. Southwest England will often be cloudy through this afternoon, with perhaps the odd spot of drizzle, turning increasingly windy across the far west, but very mild for the time of year. Over to southeast England, and it should remain mostly dry here this afternoon, with just a few glimmers of sunshine for a lucky few. Moving over to Cardiff, there'll be a lot of cloud across Wales, particularly in the north and west. Some sheltered eastern spots may see a little sunshine. Across the Midlands and into northwest England, it will be drier this afternoon compared to this morning, with spells of sunshine developing. Highs will reach around 13 Celsius, which is 55 in Fahrenheit. In the northeast, patchy rain will continue to move northwards away from Newcastle and the surrounding areas. Some brighter skies moving in from the south. Highs reaching around 11 Celsius with generally light southerly winds. Northern Scotland will remain bright for a little longer, with a few showers around. However, thicker cloud in the south, along with outbreaks of rain, will move north later. It'll also continue to become brighter across Northern Ireland as the afternoon moves on. However, it will become very windy as we move into this evening, highs of 12 Celsius. Turning wet and windy across the northwest of the UK this evening, drier elsewhere but breezy and mild. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome. It's time for the Great British Debate this hour. Now, do you remember the Thomas Malthus essay that talked about if the population became so big and people didn't die of disease and so on and so forth, we would actually we won't have enough to subsist and exist on the planet? Well, I'm asking, should there be a limit on the amount of children that we have? Tesla and SpaceX founder Elon Musk has encouraged us to all have more kids. He says that there aren't enough people in the world, and if we don't start having more children, civilization will crumble. It's after calls from some that we should have less babies in an effort to lower our carbon footprint. So I'm joined by Alistair Curry, who's head of campaigns at the UK charity Population Matters. Alistair, welcome. Now, do you believe that we need to limit the amount of children that each couple has or each person has?
We certainly shouldn't be limiting the amount of children that people have. The amount of children people have is a fundamental human right, and people should be able to choose the number they want. But when we think about what is the best number of children to have, then Elon Musk is way off beam at the moment. The UN reckons that our population is still going to be rising at the end of this century. What we're talking about at the moment is adding another 2 billion people over the next 30 or 40 years. Half the world's population at the moment is actually under 30. One thing we're absolutely not short of is people. But unfortunately, one of the consequences of that is that we're putting pressure on the natural environment, we're putting pressure on our natural resources like water, we're generating more carbon emissions. And of course, that's not evenly distributed throughout the world, but I think everyone intuitively understands each person creates a demand on the planet. If we choose to have fewer children, then that reduces that demand and helps to deal with the environmental crisis that we're in at the moment.
So you'd be in favour, in a sense, of people having fewer children rather than more, as Elon Musk has said. And the reason being that it's actually the natural resources that will not be able to... Thomas Malthus' essay said something similar, that we wouldn't have enough for our means of subsistence. So what do you make of countries like China? Because they had limits, didn't they, on how many children? It was just one, wasn't there? Do you think that's ethical, though?
It isn't ethical. As I started off by saying, it's a human right to decide how many children you have, and the consequences of China's policy were awful in terms of human suffering, in terms of forced sterilizations of babies being aborted because they were the wrong sex. There's a whole litany of terrible things that ensued from that. But the good news is that not only is that terrible, but you don't need to do it. The things we know which bring down family size and fertility rates are actually all really good things. They are women's empowerment, addressing poverty, education, and critically family planning. When people have family planning available to them and they're free to use it, then generally speaking throughout the world, fertility rates, which is the technical term for family size, that family size falls. And that's something that people choose when they're given that opportunity. Now, what we're not doing well enough at the moment is actually tackling those things. We're not empowering women or allowing women to empower themselves. Family planning, there are 270 million women in the world at the moment who've got an unmet need for modern family planning. You look at all these issues and we're not delivering well enough. If we deliver those things, then that will bring population growth down. And of course, here, where most of us do have the choice, in the global north, in rich countries like the UK, we have the biggest carbon footprints, the biggest footprint in terms of our consumption. So actually thinking about our family size here is really important. There's lots of things that we must do in order to reduce the pressure on the earth, but one of the options that we have is choosing a smaller family. For people of that age who are making that choice.
I think on your list you missed marriage, because when people get married, they don't want to sleep with each other after that. So they keep the family nice and small that way. But what do you make of the Sussexes then? They've won an award for going on about saying they only have 2 kids.
We gave them that award, in fact, at Population Matters. That's right. And, one of the reasons that we did that, we know, as other people do, that, the Sussexes are far from the most environmentally friendly family in many ways. They're wealthy. But we have to remember that actually the top 10% of wealth in in the world is actually earning over 27,000. So we're all rich, relatively speaking. What the Sussexes did do was they said very explicitly, and Prince Harry said it explicitly, that it was in the context of thinking about the impact on the planet, that they were going to limit their children, the number of children choose to have up to two children. Now, in many ways, they're not a role model for environmentalism, but we wanted to recognise that they had done something good in saying that. And they opened up a debate, which they absolutely did. After we gave that award, we had media headlines across the world which were talking about these issues of making a choice about how many children you have. And I think, we're talking about it now. It is something that people have to think about. You know, they have to be aware of the benefits that occur. But of course, those that benefit the most from addressing our environmental problems through things like choosing smaller families are our kids. It's the kids who are being born and who are about to be born, who are going to have to live in the world that we're creating just now. And so that's one of the ways in which we can keep the pressure off and give a better quality of life to them.
I was going to say, that's good of them to say that. Perhaps they could also say they won't take so many private jets and all the other bits, but you have pointed out they're not the most environmentally friendly in this. But I suppose one of the biggest things that most people would accept is that fewer people on the planet would actually be better for the environment because of the way we sort of saturate the environment of all of the things that are in it. But I'm wondering, though, in terms of Elon Musk, him saying that, why would he say such a thing when it seems quite obvious that the opposite is true?
You'd have to ask him, but I think one thing to be aware of is, you know, we're not all consumers for Elon Musk products. The people who benefit the most from a large number of people being born actually tends to be the rich and most affluent. If labour is cheap, if there's lots of people to buy your products and to work in your factories, that pushes down labour. It means you've got more money coming in. I don't know what Elon Musk's motivations are for about anything, but it has to be said that we benefit, that ordinary people, for want of a better phrase, benefit from having smaller families, from having less pressure. And of course, you know, again, you know, we're sort of talking. I'm talking here in the context of, you know, of one of amongst the world's most affluent people, but for millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in the world who are currently poor, those people have an absolute right to get more affluent, to consume more stuff in a way that we have consumed quite enough. And as they do that, the Earth is going to be bulging at the seams more in terms of the pressure on the environment. And that means we have to just reduce that number of all of us who are contributing to that. And those of us who are rich have to consume less. We have to accept that. We have to live in a more sustainable manner. But the fewer of us there are overall, the more it allows more people to lead a good quality of life on a healthy planet, which is the fundamental of what we want. Elon Musk may think that we can go to Mars and solve our problems that way. Well, most of us don't think of it that way. It's about protecting this one Earth we've got right now.
I'm glad you said it, otherwise I would have. Alistair, thank you so much. That's Alistair. He's the head of campaigns at Population Matters. Yes, he makes a good point, doesn't he? Really, Elon Musk. I mean, perhaps he's thinking of populating space. But today I'm asking whether there should be a limit on the amount of children that we have. And we've already had lots of the tweets and emails coming through. And Ali says, I'm going to have as many children as possible. The data is clear. We are headed to a massive depopulation. Just look at the data yourself. Jonathan says, no, overpopulation is a myth. We should all be able to have as many kids as we like. They're expensive, though, let's face it. Seriously, they're expensive. James says, have what you can afford. Exactly, that's what I'm thinking, James. I had 3 and wanted more, but it's just not financially possible. If people are going to have them and have no way of supporting them, then what's the point? Lorena says, yes, obviously our population has grown exponentially and our planet cannot support this. Paul, he makes this point, would never agree to Big Brother deciding who has children and how many they can have. In saying that, I don't understand why people who are struggling continue to add to their families, for sure. It makes no sense to me either. Well, keep those thoughts coming, because after the break, we'll be continuing this in our Great British Debate. You'll hear from my panellists, but first, let's get your latest news headlines.
The UK COVID alert level has been increased from 3 to 4 following the rapid increases in Omicron cases. It means the virus is now in general circulation, transmission is high, and direct COVID pressure on healthcare services is substantial and rising. The Prime Minister will address the nation in a recorded statement at 8 o'clock this evening with an update on booster vaccines. Meanwhile, Scotland's hospitality sector is stepping up its call for financial support after the government reintroduced COVID restrictions. Businesses say they're seeing mass cancellations and will need help to survive this Christmas. The government's now considering tighter measures after new self-isolation rules came into force. A gun has been recovered from the scene in West London where a man was shot and killed by police. Officers were responding to reports of a person carrying a firearm and entering a bank and a bookmaker's in Kensington yesterday. Witnesses say they heard 3 shots. The man was treated by emergency crews, but he died at the scene. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has confirmed a further £75 million in aid will go to Afghanistan. It follows discussions at the G7 meeting in Liverpool about what action can be taken to address the worsening humanitarian situation there. Officials say no funding will go directly to the Taliban and charities will be used instead. And Lewis Hamilton has missed out on a record-breaking 8th Formula One World Championship after a dramatic end to the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix today. Hamilton led from the start, but his rival, Max Verstappen, was able to overtake him in the final lap to secure his first title. Mercedes has lodged 2 protests with Formula One's governing body over the race results. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
So good afternoon. It's back to the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should there be a limit on the amount of children that we have? Elon Musk has called on us to have more kids. That's billionaire Elon Musk, by the way, as he says that there aren't enough people on the earth. But before the break, we heard from Alistair Curry from the charity Population Matters, who holds a very different view. He argued that we should be having less children to lower our carbon footprint. So what do my panel think? With me, I have Albie and also Danny. Well, let's see. I'll start with you, Albie. Go on then. Danny, go on then.
Every time.
No, Danny, you start. No, Danny.
Why I travel 93 miles each time. OK, I'll tell you what, I agree with you. I think if you're going to have family, you should think about how you're going to pay for the family. The commentator about lowering our carbon footprint, that is just such a tedious argument. And I'm going to analogise it with a car. I'm a car dealer away from broadcasting. He is basically saying, why don't you get out of your 2018 Euro 6-cylinder petrol and get on a bike? Because you're going to make a little bit of difference to the CO2 emissions. That's boring. You want to go over to continents like Africa and the Indian subcontinent. Not only are they having more children, but they're spewing out more CO2. It's the same argument. We should have as many children as we want. We should be thinking about how we're going to pay for it, because, Nana, you alluded earlier, and I think it may annoy you when you see big families and they're on benefits and they're still having more kids. That's the impression I got.
Well, I do sort of look at it and think, doesn't make any sense. It's extremely expensive to have lots of children. And there was the benefit scheme initially where you kept getting more and more money for more and more kids. And I can see that was, people did sort of slightly take advantage of it. That has changed now. So, it's no real benefit to have too many children. And I think we need to think about what we can actually afford.
It's just before we go over to Albie, it's really interesting. I mentioned the Indian subcontinent. There are cultures and communities that have more children because they needed more children. So they needed larger families in order to look after mum and dad when they got old. My best mates are Indian lads, first-generation Sikh boys, and they've got bigger families, typically, than white people like me. And they have families, and there's one of the lads is still living with his mum and dad because culturally, that's what they do.
Well, also in Africa and places like that, the mortality rate is a lot higher, so you have more children.
Correct.
My dad is one of 32 brothers and sisters.
No.
2 wives, but still, yeah, he's one of 32.
Wow.
It's a very big family. If I go to a wedding, it's like there's 500 people that all slightly look like me. Some of them are fatter, some of them shorter. None of them is good looking, but...
I don't want an ugly 32 sibling household. That
you
must
can
be.
talk.
Well, you mentioned fat. Over to you,
I didn't say
Albie.
anything about fat.
What do I think? So I find it a little bit odd what Alistair was saying, to be honest, because I think if he was to ask the question, if he was to tell Japan that they should have less children, I think the answer that he would get would be very different. So Japan has quite a serious problem with an ageing population, and it puts a lot of pressure on young people. Now, I'm in my 20s, and a lot of Western countries actually look to Japan to see where we're going to head in the future, because Japan's about 30 or 40 years ahead of us in terms of demography. And they're having huge problems with the low fertility rate in Japan, and that's causing a lot of economic and social problems, high taxes for young people. They're really encouraging young women to have as many children as possible to support the Japanese economy, because it's a huge problem. So I think it's quite irresponsible to say, in a country which is on the same trajectory, to say to people that are in my generation, have less children, when actually a lot of us are already terrified to have children because of climate change anyway. And there's already a trend in this country of lower fertility, of depopulation in a lot of Western and developed countries. So I'm not really sure we have to tell people to have less children because it's happening naturally. The question is, how do we change and transform the economy to be able to support older people without necessarily putting an unnecessary
Well, also the planet, though, because
Oh,
on younger people.
How do we create an environment where our planet can live longer, in a sense, to sustain us? Obviously, the planet will live whether we're here on it or not, but how do we keep our environment stable so that we can actually live off it? Because the point is that if we have loads and loads of people living off this environment, it may not be able to sustain us. This is the environmental argument. I don't subscribe to it. I don't subscribe to that. But that is.
I would just come into a point very quickly. So he actually used a UN projection of population, and he was saying the UN thinks that the population will still be growing at the end of the century. Well, there are some organisations that think that the population will peak at 9.7 billion in 2070 and then begin to stabilise after that and actually creep back down to 9 billion by the end of the century. So it's not fully agreed on exactly how big the population will get, but we do know that population growth globally is actually slowing. So I'm not sure if it's as big a problem as Alistair was saying.
Well, what do you think? And especially with the Sussexes getting involved as well. They gave them an award. They gave them an award.
Did they?
Yes,
right.
that's Population Matters. It came from them.
OK. My point is that I'm sick and tired of environmentalists telling us as a nation who hardly make a footprint. Our carbon footprint is so minimal compared to other. I'm sick and tired of being told you must only have a certain amount of children. You must drive a certain car, or in fact, we want you out of your car. Leave us alone to a certain extent. We understand that it's a global problem, but they need to be fair to us. We are, as far as the proportionality is concerned, we are overreaching, I think. And just leave. If you want 5 kids, have 5 kids. If you want to drive a car rather than get the train to work, drive the damn car.
Well, what do you think that Elon Musk's motivation could be for insisting that, or telling us that we should have lots of children? Because that's what he's saying.
Do you know what? I haven't even dwelt on why he said this. I don't get it.
Maybe he wants more people to buy his electric cars, or... he's got 6 kids,
It's counterintuitive because, listening to the environmentalists, the fewer people on the planet, the less CO2. So why does he want more people who are going to pump out CO2?
Well, because he's got electric cars. He said there won't be any CO2 from those cars.
That's one hell of a long
Well, I don't know. I'm trying to work out why he would even say that. I don't even know why he'd say that. Let's see what you're saying, because I'm asking, should there be a limit on the amount of children that we have? And lots of you have been letting your views be known. Rachel says, I don't understand why depopulation is necessarily a bad thing. We should think about our planet first. Mo says, no, the world is not overpopulated. World overpopulation is a myth, kind of where we're going with this one. Andre says, more people equals more innovation, which equals more humans flourishing, which equals, I'm going to add on the end there, more people eating more food. Stacey says, as long as you pay for them, then yourself, it's no one else's business. Julian says, do you think that we should be like China? What next? Government-mandated live organ donation. Oh, goodness. Bing says, it's not quantity, it's quality. We don't need more families of 12. So that's what they're saying. They're saying we don't need more families of 12.
That's a big family.
That is a very large family.
big family.
That's a very big family.
How many people in your family? Do you have a big family of brothers
So
and
I've
sisters?
got 2 sisters.
Yeah, 2 sisters.
An Irish family, because my surname is Kelly, and my dad was one of, I think, 7. But that's fairly normal, if not small, for Irish families, because, you know, predominantly they're Catholic, and obviously Catholicism has a big conflict with various ways to control birth. So I think for an Irish family, relatively normal, 6 or 7, and just me and my brother.
That's it, gosh. Well, I'm one of 4. A little African family.
I bet you're the best looking of all of them.
How did you know?
I need to make up for my little slight earlier on about...
Yes, very true, very true.
I bet you're gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
Best looking woman in... Where do you live?
What do you want? What does he want? What's he doing
I want
that
booking for next Sunday.
That's what it is. I knew it. I knew it wasn't anything decent. You know, I look at it and I mean, you know how I can't contend with those Sussexes coming out and telling us how we should be living, especially daring to talk about the planet and environment when they are absolutely the worst polluters in many respects because they're taking private jets, you know, and they certainly don't live like you or I. So their carbon footprint will be way larger just simply by the fact that they are so much more wealthy. So, no, I would say that because they're taking private jets and things like that.
You're right, but isn't, and just to play devil's advocate, isn't the message that they're getting out worth the however many tonnes of carbon for that flight to take place? Just to play devil's advocate.
What are you talking about? I don't know
The Sussexes.
No, but what do you mean? That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it makes sense in the sense that they're talking about environmentalism, and if they need to get on a private jet to go to Los Angeles to talk about environmentalism, I don't know how many tonnes of carbon that jet spews out, but their presence in Los Angeles to get the message out may be worth more in the long run.
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not. I won't.
About royal interventions on this. So actually, quite recently, I think Prince William was saying that people in Africa need to have less children, and that got quite a bad response from a lot of African nations who sort of felt that it was a little bit colonial. So I think we've got to be careful in the West at saying to parts of the world where the birth rate is higher, have less children, because we had a period of growth where we had larger families, we could have as many children as we wanted, and no one was getting involved. I think we've just got to let these societies get on with it, go through the same development that we got through and have the same prosperity that we now enjoy without Western governments getting involved.
Absolutely, especially not royals telling us how we should save the planet by reducing our carbon footprint. That's really irritating. Right, well, listen, I was going to say that earlier, because we were talking about, because I said I really wasn't bothered whether somebody asked me to use a COVID pass or not, because obviously that would mean you could be tested or you show your certification. I personally don't really mind it. I had quite a few messages, and this one in particular I had to read out. It was from David. He says, "You've sold out." Well, I haven't really. I was just saying that. He goes, "I thought you were a fighter against stupid rules by the government. Never, ever email me again." I'm thinking, you've emailed me. I'm confused. I don't know. Listen, it's time for Supplement Sunday when we take a look at some of the other stories that have caught our eyes, and there's loads to talk about today. An investigation by the Mail on Sunday suggests that some high street retailers are allowing men to use their female changing rooms as long as they identify as a woman. So a 6-foot-tall male reporter with a beard who said he identified as a woman was given permission to use fitting rooms in the female sections of some of its stores. Danny and Albie, is this not a worrying insight? Let's start with you, Danny.
It's scandalous. You know, I'm 6'5", I'm obviously a bloke, and I could just go into Topshop or whatever and then say, you know, I identify as a woman from now on, and I'd like to go and... Now,
chance would be a fine thing. I'm sorry, dude.
I may already have the moves.
That's true. He's got a point.
That might give me a visual head start. But I think it's awful. But this is where the left eats itself, because they cannot say no now to anything. It's a Pandora's box that has been opened, and you can now not say no. And do you know what, Nana? I've been on this panel with you over the months, and you are so right. It is eroding what it means to be a woman. It's eroding the word woman.
Yeah, well, in fact, I'm not supposed to say that. I think I'm a cis woman now. I'm not just. I can't use the word woman on its own because that's what I actually am. I now have to put something in front. I won't be doing that, by the way. I'm a woman, and that's what a woman is.
You are a woman, exactly. Look, I was particularly concerned about this story because we do have to have a serious conversation in this country about what the practical outcomes of having trans-inclusive spaces in society will be, and whether or not there are any conflicts with women's rights. Now, I think in this instance that the Daily Mail has highlighted, there is quite clearly a conflict. That man should not have been able to say, I identify as a woman, and be allowed into a women's changing room. That shouldn't be a controversial thing to say. No. Equally, trans women should have access to women's changing rooms in Topshop or any other women's shop. If they've been through transition, I don't think that should be a
But how could you check anyway? You couldn't check. I mean, how would you know? Somebody could say, I'm a trans woman. But then to be honest, to be fair, most trans women look like women. So I don't... I don't really have an issue with somebody who's been through the change and is going through the whole, and has gone through that very, very serious process of changing their gender visually and physically. I respect that, You've got to do that. You're serious about what you're saying for whatever reason, whether it's an illness mentally or whether it's something else. I don't know. But I have a little bit of respect for that. But I can't have respect for a man going in who looks just like a man, saying that. And actually, I would feel unpleasant if it was obvious that person was. And
it was a bloke. He wasn't identifying as a woman. He was a bloke. He had a big beard. Mind you saying that the circuses of yesteryear, they had the bearded women, didn't they?
Well, that's a circus, though, isn't it? Right, next, a story that caught Danny's eye. A government transport minister says that owning a car is outdated 20th century thinking and will soon become a thing of the past for most people in Britain. Junior Transport Minister Trudy Harrison told the Green Travel Conference that the country was reaching a tipping point. Where shared mobility in the form of car clubs, scooters and bike shares will soon be a realistic option for many of us to get around.
Danny, I think you've got a vested interest in this.
Really?
Judy talks rubbish. I was in London a week or so ago, and you've got infrastructure here to turn yourself from being a pedestrian to a cyclist. Brilliant. To turn yourself from a pedestrian to an e-scooterist. That's fabulous. Take yourself away from this M25 boundary and get yourself up to Birmingham, Coventry, the West Midlands, my home city of Liverpool. And she wants us to car share. What does she expect me to do? Knock on old coughing Derek's at 65 who's full of COVID and say, Degsy, can you take us into Birmingham, mate? Because some Judy from London thinks it's a good idea to cut down on CO2. It's a non-starter.
Well, it's ridiculous.
It's a detachment from reality.
You don't start and finish at the same locations with people, so I don't see how that's going to work. Albie, what do you think?
I do actually think we probably will move to a society where we use less cars in the future, and I think it probably will begin in London and the South East because we've got better... No, I don't
That's
drive.
What I thought.
But actually, there are a lot of people in my age who live in London who don't drive.
Well, do you know why that is?
We don't need to drive.
You can't afford to drive.
No, it's not about I can afford to drive, but I literally have no need to drive. And we are moving towards an economy where we are seeing people, renting cars on subscriptions, for example, instead of buying them outright, renting phones on subscriptions instead of buying them outright. We're seeing sort of the Netflixification of broad parts of society. I think this article is just talking about that trend going forwards in the future. And I do think, car drivership is lower, especially in London, for younger people.
Well, if you've got the right infrastructure in place, as Danny is alluding to, if you've got, so in places like London and some places like Manchester, where you've got really good sort of metro networks and things like that, then you could argue that you don't really need a car and it ends up being more expensive owning a car and you're better off on public transport if the links are there. But if they're not there, which is the majority of the country, then for Judy to be saying that, whilst I respect where she's going with it, it's just, it's for the birds. It's not going to happen. It's a ridiculous notion that you think that people, I'm just going to go in your house and just share a car. Do you know I'm going to go down on my e-scooter? I don't think so. I'm not getting on any e-scooter going, so what do you think this is? No.
It's a non-starter. It's not going to happen. Maybe it is. It's for the long term, Albie. But we're talking long term. Not even you're a young whippersnapper. Not even in your lifetime will
I would like to
Derek be taking me into Birmingham.
I would like to think that we can move towards a society where public transport is better in parts of the country which aren't London, better in the West Midlands, better in the North West, better in the North East. So we can start to move towards this economy where people aren't reliant on cars, because it's not a very efficient way to get around. It's much more efficient.
It's true.
To use public transport.
Well, I suppose, but it's way more comfortable in your own cars, I've got to be honest with you. And to finish, maybe a unique investment opportunity. A new study has found that investing in collectible toys, such as... Keep it clean, people, stop it. Collectible toys such as Lego could be more lucrative than pouring money into gold. Researchers at the Higher School of Economics in Russia found that the second-hand market for popular toys rises up in value by 11% every year. So I'm going to ask you guys, have you ever invested in anything or collected anything, Albie?
So I used to collect model railway trains. They're these really cool electric, they're called Hornby trains.
Yes. Oh, I know.
And I've still got all of them from when I was a child, and I still love them.
Have you got the boxes?
I've got the boxes, I've got everything, it's pristine.
So did you actually use them then?
Of course I use them.
Some people just collect the boxes and go, oh, isn't that great? Oh, look at my lovely train. Oh, and then nothing happens. You're like, well, why have you done that? Just do something with it, for goodness sake.
And the thing is, you can't open them and use them, because if you open them and use them, then they just drop in value. So your fabulous Hornby collection, if you hadn't have actually used it and got years of enjoyment out of it, might be worth a few quid. You know?
Well, it wasn't about the money when I was a child. It was about the fun.
Good man, that's right. My pals collect classic cars. Before you were even born, we're talking 1980s and 1990s. I'll give you a great example.
Well, you're not born then in the 1980s?
He's only 20-odd.
I was born in the mid-90s.
Oh, I feel so old.
So do I. I'll give you a great example, but you need somewhere to store them. 10 years ago, he paid £1,100 for a Ford Fiesta RS Turbo. It's now worth 18 grand. He's got half a dozen of things like this, but you'd need somewhere to store them.
You need somewhere to store them, and that probably cost you more than any increase in value. That's the thing. You should know, Danny. You know all about storing
I know all about that.
Cars, yeah.
Do you collect anything?
Ooh, clothes.
She looks fabulous every time.
Thank you. I genuinely collect, but I don't have lots of clothes, but I collect clothes. So by that, I mean, so a lot of the outfits that I have, I've had since I was 21 or 17. So some of the things I'm wearing, people go, oh, I really like that. Where'd you get that from? And I'm thinking, oh, they're not here anymore. The shop's not here anymore. But I collect really nice clothes.
And every outfit's stunning. I'm sorry to be such a brown
nose. What about
nose.
my outfit?
Look, I think you're the most handsome man on a panel, any panel at GB News. Really, but going back to Nana, every time you look stunning.
Oh, thank you, Danny.
Brilliant.
What does he want? What does he want? Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. So, on today's show as well, we've also been asking, 2 years on from Boris Johnson's election victory, has his tenure been a success or failure? And according to our Twitter poll, 73% of you say it's been a failure, and 27% of you say it's been a success. Interesting. So the majority think that he's failed. Are you surprised at that?
I'm not surprised after the week that he's had, no.
What do you say?
I'm not surprised. Bearing in mind, it's a GB News poll, and we know that, generally speaking, GB News viewers are more sceptical, maybe, of things like COVID passports. I think that's fair to say. It's not like an LBC mid-morning poll where they're all hysterically left-wing and all of that. So, I just...
James O'Brien never
well, look,
invited you on a show.
Of course, there are other hysterical broadcasters that are clearly left-wing as well, but I won't mention those.
Hysterical.
They're not on their own.
See you Sunday.
Right. Well, thank you so much. My fabulous panel, Danny Kelly, of course, and Albie Alan-Kona. And, of course, big thank you to you for joining me. I'll be back next week between 4 and 6. Until then, enjoy your Sunday. Take care.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking largely dry across England and Wales, with rain clearing from Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. Southwest England will often be cloudy through this afternoon, with perhaps the odd spot of drizzle, turning increasingly windy across the far west, but very mild for the time of year. Over to southeast England, and it should remain mostly dry here this afternoon, with just a few glimmers of sunshine for a lucky few. Moving over to Cardiff, there'll be a lot of cloud across Wales, particularly in the north and west. Some sheltered eastern spots may see a little sunshine. Across the Midlands and into northwest England, it will be drier this afternoon compared to this morning, with spells of sunshine developing. Highs will reach around 13 Celsius, which is 55 in Fahrenheit. In the northeast, patchy rain will continue to move northwards away from Newcastle and the surrounding areas. Some brighter skies moving in from the south. Highs reaching around 11 Celsius with generally light southerly winds. Northern Scotland will remain bright for a little longer, with a few showers around. However, thicker cloud in the south, along with outbreaks of rain, will move north later. It'll also continue to become brighter across Northern Ireland as the afternoon moves on. However, it will become very windy as we move into this evening, highs of 12 Celsius. Turning wet and windy across the northwest of the UK this evening, drier elsewhere but breezy and mild. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Polly Middlehurst, and these are your latest GB News headlines this hour. The UK COVID alert level has been increased within the last hour to 3 from 4, from 3, I should say, to 4, following the rapid increase